hand in hand with sustainability, now we'll get into copyright and journalism content. Last September, this organization, the Inter-American Press Association, in alliance with more than 20 other regional and global organizations, decided to emphasize a discussion that started many years ago in Europe and last February in Australia. We are talking about a calling for the defense of the value of professionalism and journalism in the digital ecosystem. In other words, media wants digital platforms to value media content and pay a fair and reasonable price or remuneration for that content. Later on, we'll discuss, as I said before, about the Code of Negotiation of Digital Media and Platforms approved last February in Australia. Now I want to present an interview between the German Publisher Association and Axel Voss about copyright legislation and how it was introduced in the European Parliament and how this is spread to each country of the Union. Let me introduce Philippe Meistermann. He will conduct the interview with the legislator, German legislator, or European legislator, Axel Voss. Philippe is part of the Belgium office of the German Publisher Association, an organization where he has also served as European policy advisor. He previously worked in the German Parliament and in the French Ministry of Culture. He holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in law from the University of Paris and University of Cologne. Thank you very much for being with us, Philippe. I know we're going to have an excellent interview with Axel Voss, and I'm sure Florian Nem from Axel Springle is also present in this because he will conduct the next panel, and maybe he will be part also of this interview. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here today, and I'm looking whether my interviewee is also present. Mr. Voss?
Yes, he is. He is.
I'm here.
Ah, okay.
There you go.
Perfect. All right. I will start with a short introduction of Mr. Voss. He is a German lawyer and politician of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, and he has been a member of the European Parliament since 2009 and the coordinator of the European People's Party group in the European Parliament Legal Affairs Committee since 2017. And his main focus is on digital and legal issues. In 2019, Mr. Voss was responsible for the copyright directive in the European Parliament as a parliamentary rapporteur, and he achieved a majority for this directive, which introduced the European neighboring right of press publishers, and this led the groundwork for the fair remuneration of media in the internet. So my first question would be, Mr. Voss, when have you become aware of the financial struggle of media companies in the digital space and of the so-called value gap? And what motivated you to take up the challenge to become the rapporteur on the copyright directive?
So thank you, and hello to everyone. Thanks for having me, for the invitation, and also for the introduction. So, of course, there has been no exact date when I became aware of the situation of press publishers. But of course, you notice these if you're reading sometimes then the newspaper, you have some articles in it. And all of a sudden, then your local publisher is also contacting you and asking, and you find your regional Parliament all of a sudden that the diversity of news is not in a way performed any longer than what you have seen years ago. So it was a long discussion. Then in the European Parliament, of course, then there came up the idea, oh, we have to reconstruct the situation regarding press publishers' rights, and also the so-called value gap, and our Article 17 regarding this better balanced situation between platforms and the authors and performers and so on. And then all of a sudden the Commission came up with a proposal, and this was then a time where everyone was aware of it. It was a long discussion, and it took also a long time in the European Commission to at least cast it into a kind of a legal text. And then you are, we have looking for someone who should do this. And at first it was a colleague of mine, and she became elected then in Malta. And so that's where then I had the chance in also coming to this situation. But the need of change is also, you have to have in mind that press publishers is a very important pillar for democratic states and rule of law orientated states. And that's why we need press publishers. We need also the diversity of it. And then you are all of a sudden totally aware that this situation can't go on like it is, where big tech giants are taking over let's say the guidance of information. And here we then have been aware that the financial situation of our press publishers are getting worse. And so the suffering of diversity, and that's why then we tried to come to a point where we are saying the press publishers need something to confront big tech companies, and they need also the fair share of revenues. So originating obviously from publishers of content. So this is something where we then thought, so if they are doing this not voluntarily, then the legislator has to decide.
And could you maybe explain to us very briefly, what was your task as a rapporteur? What does a rapporteur in the European Parliament do, and how did you navigate through the legislative process?
Yeah, so of course I was very honored to become the EP rapporteurs for such an important file. Not knowing at the beginning that the younger generation do not even, it seems that they do not even have a clue what intellectual property rights are and what the value of this is. The younger generation got a kind of an intention in saying, oh, everything should be free on the internet and so on. So, but I became then rapporteur for it to elaborate the position of the European Parliament and represent this then in so-called trialogues. But at first, and this is the system of the European Parliament, we have one Parliament rapporteur, and the other political groups are sending also one rapporteur, and this, how we are calling this, a shadow rapporteur. So, and then at that time we have had 8 political groups in the Parliament, and so therefore 8 rapporteurs or shadow rapporteurs. And the rapporteur of the Parliament has the task to manage this file, to find, if it's possible, majorities, and here in this case it was very hard to find it, but also you can make new proposals if you're not coming forward with one issue, and then you have to manage it and to negotiate this also with the European Commission and the European Council. So you are in a very responsible position for it, and you are managing also the whole process or the procedure in it.
So you mentioned it already that maybe there was some misunderstanding from younger citizens, and there was indeed broader opposition to this proposal from the public, but of course also from the companies that these rules were in the end targeted at. So what did you have to deal with during these negotiations?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can really describe this where I found myself into it more than less at the end. So of course we created at first this approach from the European Parliament, and this at first has not been adopted by a kind of a public opinion, because they were bombarding us with emails, and not only me, it was all of these at that time 751 MEPs, so member of parliaments, and yeah, you have to be aware only a few of them are knowing what's going on, and the others are getting somehow insecure in their own position and not knowing what is the content behind. So more than less you have massive opponents. At first, in the first place, the big tech companies, they are not liking at all what you're doing here, because it costs them a lot. And so therefore they have been the opponents. But politically, it was a kind of, I had in this shadow rounds one, so she was with the Greens in the house here, so the Green Party, but she was originally from the Pirates, and they have a totally different understanding how to deal with content in the internet. And that's why I have been criticized, and they are going directly to the public and trying to motivate all the younger generation in saying at first, oh, regarding the value gap for musicians, for instance, oh, here, look, they are installing upload filter. This was one of these big points they have made. And the second point, and regarding the publishers' rights, it has been criticized by the Save the Link campaign, because they are intending to motivate the younger generation through, I would say, false information. It's a kind of an obvious intention to bring them to, they're saying, oh, they are breaking the internet, and you can't have a kind of a link to press publishers any longer, and so on. And this is then misunderstood by the younger generation.
So how did you then convince your political opponents in the end? Because what arguments did you use?
Yeah, we had and this was probably not very fortunate, but we had a lot of articles on board where you can create enemies on each article. So, and here you have to start to think about how you can reduce this. So some of these has been text and data mining, some of these has been fair remuneration, but the most one has been this so-called value gap issue. And and so we tried in convincing them through a kind of a very clear position that the digital age or the digital development has changed the whole business model for press publishers, and then making also clear that press publishers play a very important role for democratic states and also this diversity of the content, and that publishers' rights are also necessary to restore the economic value of press publications and to protect them from exploitation. And also, yeah, the total behavior then has to be different. But press publishers also provide the structure for the publications and are economically responsible, and therefore, and this is understood, I think, also by younger generation and enemies of copyright, that they should receive their own rights for the performance, so that they are getting also a right for quality journalism and the structure, and so that we can also counterfight or fight the fake news on the internet. So we need serious press publishers or serious professional working journalists, because fake news also is a part of kind of destabilizing democratic structures. So that's why it is very important. And
for instance,
of course, let me add one sentence also. Therefore, also an assigned right is not a sufficient one for the press publishers. Therefore, we need these ancillary rights. Sorry.
No, of course. So one of the suggestions that you have made in the process to get a majority for this neighboring right in the end was to introduce a share of the remuneration for the journalist. So what role did that suggestion play in convincing your colleagues?
Yeah. This was more than less a kind also of an important part to convince some colleagues in the House. They have been very, very critical regarding press publishers' rights itself. And therefore, then it was mostly or mainly from the left part of the political scenery in the House. And that's why then they all of a sudden, if they became aware that this is not only a kind of a cash cow for press publishers, this is also something what is supporting journalists, and this has been then very convincing to them. So it was a kind of an argument where you are socializing this right in a way, and this then convinced also not all, but some of the colleagues. And I was happy not to have the whole range of opponents with me.
And could you maybe give us more detail? How were the lines split, for example, from country to country or parliamentary groups, parties, the political lines? Maybe explain to us how was the positioning of your colleagues towards this proposal?
Yeah, and yeah, this has been also not very typical if you're comparing this to other files. This is what I have learned then at that time, but it was quite interesting to see how different the usage of culture is. So if you're looking to France, for instance, from the far left to the far right, all French MEPs have except one, I think, but all of them have supported the idea of copyright. So a totally different understanding of culture and its value. In Germany, they have been confused, I would say, and this is very harmless expressed now, but confused by all these, from my point of view, false information that we are installing upload filter, that we do not have a link any longer. And so the public there then plays a certain role, and a lot of colleagues get somehow hasn't been convinced that this is the right step forward. In the EPP group, so for all your auditors here in the video, the EPP group is the middle right, center right party. And so we have been, or have had a kind of a split in saying 80% supporting, 20% not. It was more extreme in the socialist group. There has been a kind of a split 50-50, 50 supporting and 50 against. And the liberals, for instance, they had the reverse of the EPP group. So they have had 20% supporting and 80% against. So it was totally split throughout the parties. And there here you have a kind of an home country culture mentality where this is playing a big role. But let me point this once again, without the French MEPs, we wouldn't have got this legal tool for copyright. So this has been very, very important.
So as we want to leave some time for questions before the end, I would close the interview for now and ask two last questions to close this interview. So first, do you have any explanation of why member states in European countries are taking so much time to implement the copyright directive now? And secondly, what would you propose now to ensure the diversity and independent economic viability of journalistic offerings? What would be your suggestion?
So at first, the question of balancing the value gap is not a very easy one, because you do not have to balance these between the platforms and the creative sector or right holders or authors and performers. Also now balancing these towards the users. And this is quite complicated, and therefore, you have to be aware that intellectual property rights, like copyright, is not to 100% any longer compatible with upload platforms, with massive upload platforms. So there you need a kind of technique to come to the situation where we are saying you platform have to license more with everyone. And therefore they are using techniques what the public opinion doesn't like. So, and this is why some of the member states try to find some tools to simplify the possibility for platforms, but then also seeing that this might infringe also the copyright and the copyright holders. And to find a balance there, it's not very easy from my point of view, because you have to understand our copyright directive is addressed to the member states, and they are then transforming this into their national laws, and they can add here something to fulfill the goal what the European level was claiming for or asking for. And this is something what might take a longer time, and we ask also the Commission to come up with guidelines to implement these articles. and especially the most important ones. And it took them also a long time in trying to come up with these guidelines. And that's why probably they feel a little bit insecure in if what they are doing, if this is the right way forward. And that's why probably. What we should have done better probably regarding the press publishers is that we should have a kind of more bargaining rights for them, and that we should more unite them, because it's always a kind of a disadvantage if you are standing alone in front of a global big tech company and asking for more money. Then I would say you should use the whole sector in the continent or in a member state to negotiate for everyone. So, and this would be a kind of a better situation, but I couldn't have done this because this was creating also some opponents to all these directives. So, and I couldn't afford to have more opponents than what I have already.
Well, thank you for all of the answers. I would like to know whether there are any questions from the audience.
Yes, Philippe. Yeah, I believe, Philippe, I have two questions in one. First, at the beginning of your presentation, Axel, you say that legislators should create the space between media publishers and digital platforms if they do not agree to negotiate voluntarily. So what would be your message to the US legislators when the US Congress does not allow the News Media Alliance to negotiate voluntarily with the platforms? That would be the first one. And second, because you're coming from Europe, but we are in Latin America too here with this organization. In Latin America, it's too complicated because some or many governments don't like media at all. What would you say to a legislator to understand what they have to understand about media, copyright, and democracy?
Oh, that's not an easy question to answer. But at first, so if a platform has only cash in mind and they are going and not having values in mind, then I would say there is no way of voluntarily adopting or giving more money to all the content creators. So then I would say if there is a kind of value gap also, and I assume this is also the case in Latin America, then and if the platforms are not understanding that also values have to be secured, especially the press publishers, then there is only a way to regulate it. And of course, you might have some different steps. So if you just might ask for a signed right, or you might come to an ancillary right. And also then at the end of these tools, you might have also in place an obligation to remunerate. And here you can have diverse approaches on these. If you're giving some already a kind of an amount, making sure that this amount then will be paid. Or the best thing, of course, would ever be that the press publishers, as a kind of common body, it should approach the platforms and negotiate. This is something what we have seen more than less also in Australia, where Facebook and Google are refused at the beginning, but then finding the right requirements or the right legal frame to it. I know they did this on these kind of competition law issues, and we have done this on this level of copyright. And both together probably would be the best. And this is what I would advise. Go for it. Otherwise, it's destroying the whole press publishers. What you need to, let's have the check and balances towards the governments, and also securing democratic and rule of law values. And but now to Latin America, probably I do not have too much experience over there, but I still would say, if you are thinking in values and in the value level, and not only on this dimension of cash, then you're coming to the results more than less easily. And if you're balancing here everything better. So we are also diverse in Europe. We are complicated in the structure of the European Union. Of course, we have a kind of a legal frame, but if you do not have a legal frame and you would like to unify a little bit the interest of Latin America, probably it might be the best way forward in unifying the media companies, that they are confronting big tech companies in the first part, and then convincing the governments and saying, please, if they are not taking our news on board on the platforms, they shouldn't be allowed any longer to take any news on board. So then you can secure yourself a little bit that they are also might be interested in the news you are producing. And this is what I would suggest spontaneously now. If this would already everything, I'm doubting this a little bit, but this might be a way forward. You have to unify your sector in a way, and then trying to have a bigger power to confront the platforms. I know it's easy said, and probably not that easy done, but it's worth to try.
Well, thank you. There's one more question from the audience, but I'm looking at Ricardo to tell us whether there's still time.
Oh, yes, we do. Thank you. Go ahead.
Perfect. So there's one more question from the audience, which is, what recommendations for members of parliaments in other countries would you like to share with us?
So what we have faced here on problems regarding these demonstrations in Germany and the younger generation and so on, I would start today, if there is time, also as press publishers or the creative sector, and bringing back the meaning of intellectual property rights. This is important, and also let them understand in a way that this is a kind also of a fundamental right. This is not just because of money, it's property, it's a fundamental right. It's also mentioned already in the UN Declaration 1948. So it's nothing new. This is, it might or it seems to be new for the younger generation in the internet, but it isn't at all from a legal point of view. So then I would say this is necessary, that the younger generation is understanding that some of us in the society are living on this work of creating content, and they have to have a kind of a fair remuneration. And then, prepare also, in this case, the media companies, that they should unite themselves. You need a kind of a united political support, hopefully throughout all the political parties, and then try to find a kind of a regulation, so where also industry, government, and regulator are together and going this way down, and then coming up with some, probably you need some market studies and so on, but then you can prepare yourself. And this is what I would do if you have some figures also in how much cash the platforms are getting, and that press publishers sometimes get no remuneration at all, that this can't be the case. And this is also understandable for everyone who's creating content, and also for the younger generation, if they are knowing I'm working for it and I would like to have a fair remuneration. Of course, then the legislator can do here a lot, either in the copyright or in these competition law issues, and then also finding a kind of collective bargaining clause here, that you might have a kind of eye-level situation. And then I think this would be something what I would recommend in the future, and where I didn't have had the choice to improve everything what I would like to have, because I wouldn't have the majority. So that's why a kind of unifying, or so industry, government, and regulator, this would be a big, big, big help.
So I'm picking up what you said also on uniting the publishers and bringing forward their claims, their demands together. And I would ask you the question: what advice, what recommendations would you give to our audience, so the publishing organizations of South, Central, and North America, with regards on to how to address their governments and what demands to make?
Yeah, this is also not a very easy part, but the politicians has to be aware what's going on. I think so I'm just focusing sometimes on the northern part of America. So I think they are aware, but and now they got a kind of an idea or motivation because of the European copyright directive right now, and then they get a kind of a better idea how to come forward. Sometimes in the US, of course, they are acting with the principles. It might help in the digital world in just saying, oh yes, you have to fair remunerate. And this gives you already a kind of a possibility to confront also the publishers, but then the courts are deciding. So, and you never know what the courts are doing then at the end. But this might be a kind of a way forward. You have to talk to the politicians and the legislator in also trying to give them figures and ideas that if this is continuing like it is right now, then we are disappearing and we are not stabilizing the situation in a democratic structure, because we are the one who are controlling and have the power also of the public opinion. And so, and this, I think politicians should understand. And also the value gap, they should understand that this is not a fair remuneration any longer. And that's why I would say these are some simple arguments, but of course you have to deliver some figures.
So I think these are very poignant remarks on your side. I don't know whether we have any further questions from the audience. It doesn't seem to be the case.
So I have one, I would say, Philippe would be the last one. When we talk to platforms, they defend themselves that they are doing a lot of things already for media. Different programs, accelerators, giving money in different projects and programs. Do you consider that will replace copyright, or is that a two-way street? How do you understand that way?
Yeah, of course you have to combine. So of course, copyright at the one hand side and freedom of expression and the doing your business, they are all somehow fundamental rights related. And therefore you need to have a balance, and this can't be only one-sided. And here, of course, you can also think about that the best way forward, and this might also answer a little bit the question what you have had before, is if you're coming up with a kind of an unwaivable right for press publishers. Because sometimes the market power can be so intensive that then kind of a smaller or a small or medium-sized publisher, you might not be standing firm against the big tech giant. So that's why you need a right, and you need probably kind of unification, but an unwaivable right might here also be a kind of the best way forward to bring them to the negotiation table. So, and this is, I think politicians, a legislator has to do, they have to be obliged to negotiate, whatever the outcome also then might be. If this is not fair, then you have to go a step further. But this then might be a kind of this step forward in saying, you have to negotiate. You can't only grab this content and use it for your platform. No, you have to do here more. And I know this is not really the answer to your question, but it was important for me also to mention these ones.
Thank you very much, Axel. Thank you very much, Philippe.